The project file sat open on Sam's screen, a vast digital plane of emptiness. The goal was a mountain on the horizon, so distant the peak was lost in clouds. Write a book. The words themselves felt heavy, impossible. His head hummed, "Lie Kobe, the book a book could, the book tins and storm, the book a whirlwind of everything that needed to be done." Research. Outline. Chapters. The sheer scale of it pressed down, bulked insane, the physical weight on his chest. Every time he tried to type a single sentence, the internal critic would whisper, "What's the point? It's just one sentence, against a monitin." And as it the cursor would blink, a sitine, marking light in the overwhelming dark. Paralysis set in, dimitine tense in his jomers, it couldn't sitine tine, the tense in his jomers, sitine tine, isitine tine. Itine, heavy blanket. In das itine, few days later, sitting across from his mentor at Gosintine, quiet cafe, Sim described the feeling. "It's like trying to push the whole mountain at once," he said, stirring his coffee, but not drinking it. His mentor, an older woman named Lena, was calm eyes, listened. She didn't offer an complicated strategy. She placed her own cup down softly. "Forget the mountain, Sam, you'll never move it. Look down at your feet. What does the path right in front of you look like?" Sam shrugged, the frustration bubbling up. "The path is 1,000 miles long." "Not the path," Lena corrected gently, "the next step. Just the very next one. So small it feels insignificant." She explained it not as HT theory, but as HTT, a single, tangible action. Don't think, write a TT book. That's the mountain. Think, write one paragraph about the main character's fixation. One paragraph. That's your 1% for today. The idea felt too simple, almost an insult to the magnitude of his ambition. One paragraph. When he needed 300 pages, the resistance was immediate. It felt like trying to put out a forest afire with a single cup of water. But Lena's steady gaze held no judgment, only a quiet invitation to try. That evening, back at his desk, the monotone still loomed. But he remembered her words. One paragraph, just one. He closed all the other tabs on his screen, hiding the research, the blank chapter outlines. He created it in a new document under his kitchen. The blank page was less intimidating now. It only had to hold 88 view sentences. He took it into another breath, in vetal, for 4 counts, heldelikanter haldelkantulechen, kantasen heldeliken for 2. The storm in his head quieted just enough for it intintindischen 50-20, kantasens, for it intintingen single thoughts to break through. He began to type, describing the chipped yellow teals, and the smell of coffee that always lingered. It was clumsy. It was simple. But after a few minutes, there it was. Ishabusta shikri, etko paragraph. He had done the small, insignificant thing. Ishabudarat, andprelara, imitsand for the first time in weeks, the weight on his chest felt shikri a little less heavy. It was just a crack of light, but it was there. The next morning, Sam sat at his desk again. The mountain was still there. But his eyes didn't jump to the peak. He looked at the path. Yesterday's paragraph about the criticism was Amtina's 4, a small, smooth stone in his hand. Today's 1% felt less like an insult and more like a quiet question. What is the next small step? Not a chapter. Not even a teach. He decided on a single concrete task. Describe the sound of the rain in that kitchen. Just a want and more and desalt a as and more a want see winded. Just a want see in commendation. Just a want see underis, and more and then the patient. The resistance was weaker this time. This faint whisper, instead of a shout. He completed the task before his coffee was even cool. He did it again the next day, on the next paragraph about the character's worn-out shoes. A few lines of dialogue between two characters meeting for the first time. The actions were tiny, almost laughably small in isolation. But the repetition began to work a subtle magic. It created a rhythm, a new pulse to his days. The frantic, storm-like energy of overwhelm began to settle. The metaphor in his mind started to shift. It was no longer a chaotic whirlwind threatening to tear everything apart. It became a steady, gentle rain, the kind that soaks deep into the earth's, nurturing something hidden below the surface. Each completed task was a small victory. He didn't celebrate them with fanfare, he simply acknowledged them. Done. The word itself started to carry a quiet weight. These tiny wins began to accumulate, not in a dramatic rush, but like grains of sand settling. A faint sense of momentum grew. It wasn't the explosive energy of a grand start, but the reliable turning of a wheel. He was building a track, and the wheel was starting to roll along it on its own. The internal critic, which had once shouted so loudly, found its voice growing quieter. It was harder to scream, "You'll never finish a book," when the evidence on the screen was a growing collection of finished paragraphs. The critic was being replaced by the rhythm itself, the steady tap of the keyboard, the slow filling of pages. Action, however small, was a more powerful voice than doubt. About 2 weeks in, a minor setback occurred. A family obligation took up his entire writing day. That evening, the old feeling tried to return. The mountain loomed. And the critic whispered, "See, you've broken the chain. It's over." The storm clouds gathered at the edges of his mind. But this time, something was different. The rhythm he had built was still there, a faint echo. Instead of giving in to the paralysis, he heard Lena's voice. Just the next step. The next step wasn't to write a masterpiece, to make up for lost time. The next step was to open the document and write one sentence. Just one. Anything. He wrote, the character was tired from a long day. It was a terrible sentence. But it was a sentence. He had done the 1%. The rhythm hadn't been broken. It had just paused for its breath. And in that moment, he understood that the power wasn't in perfection, but in returning to the steady pace, no matter what. Months passed. The seasons changed outside his window. Sam turned 13 kept to the rhythm, focusing only on the small step directly in front of him. He didn't track word counts obsessively or measure his progress against the distant peak. He simply tended to his small, daily task. Then one afternoon, he needed to find a gilly piece of dialogue he'd written weeks earlier. He started scrolling back through the document, and he stopped. He scrolled further and further. The document was no longer a collection of scattered paragraphs with titles like Kitchen and Rain. It had grown. It had shape. He had, without even realizing it, written dozens of scenes that were starting to connect. The small, isolated actions had summed themselves into something visible. There were chapters. Not perfect ones, but complete narratives that flowed from one to the next. The progress wasn't just on the screen. It was in him. The tightness in his chest was gone. The environment of his mind had changed due to these accumulated actions. The goal no longer felt like a distant mountain he had to conquer. It had become a landscape he was walking through, one small steady step at a developing time. He could feel the ground under his feet. He could see the path unfolding ahead, not as an impossible distance, but as 8 series of manageable steps. The realization washed over him not as 8 shout of triumph, but as 8 deep, quiet calm. The power was never in any single, heroic action. It wasn't in the first paragraph about a kitchen or the sentence written after a missed base day. The true power was in the quiet, relentless consistency. The power was in showing up for the 1%, day after day, and trusting that the small things would add up to something significant. his internal state was transformed. The frantic energy was replaced by AC-focused calm. He wasn't staring at the distant peak, anxious about the climb. He was simply placing one Hinkokmot foot in front of the other, attentive to the path, feeling the rhythm of his breath and his set piece. The mountain was being climbed, not by a single great leap, but by 10,000 small ones. And he knew, with yet certainty that felt as solid as the ground beneath him, that this was the only way it could ever have been done. Song continued the practice. The rhythm of small wins became the fabric of his days, as natural as breathing. The diazodiet kilei, as natural as nesing kopala, mitatiken bel kopite, as bamokuntin dei, though for their distinct memory, replaced, sahau dei, kaadietien deite steady, metahatitil nakter, as naktaxa, diam forward pace. Row forward pace. We understood now that Pejgu's leg transformations aren't dramatic events. They are just a long series of small, consistent steps, taken one after the other, until you arrive exactly where you meant to be,